Woo, we're live. Okay, so um, I'm going to get right to the point. So the point of this video is I wanted to talk about why Star Wars doesn't feel like it used to back in the day. It's because it went woke. No, I'm just kidding. No, I was thinking about this a lot, and people say that I've heard this joke, the meme that men think about the Roman Empire at least once a day, and that's probably true. But we also think a lot about Star Wars, and I am a Gen Xer. I am Generation Zero of Star Wars. Star Wars was created for me, meaning that when it came out, I was a 6-year-old boy, and it was everything I ever wanted. By the way, I'm trying to. So we're going to get into that, and I've been thinking about it a lot because, and if you've read any of my books and you're paying attention, there are very subtle Easter eggs that call back to especially the original trilogy. There are some references also to the prequels as well, which I probably didn't like as much. And so if you read my books, you might see that, and I would love to hear from you if you've been a reader of my books and you think like you've read something like, wait a minute, that sounds familiar, or well, I'm doing that on purpose. Hang on, my coffee just got done. I know this is really lame, but when I make coffee now, I make a big pot of it, and then I'll just microwave it for the next day or two until I run out. Then I make more. But I started with a percolator, and I love percolated coffee. I think we all went on a wrong path when we started buying Mr. Coffees and the automatic drip. I don't know what the benefit was. The percolators are better, and I noticed that along the line. And first of all, espresso is percolated coffee, just intense percolated coffee. But anyway, I'm going to get my coffee, and then we're going to talk about this. I'm not going to screw around and talk about other things until at least I'm done with that, and then we'll give you a little update. So hang on one second. I'm right here. I'm just getting my coffee. And now I always use this mug, but this is my space mug right here. It's got my home planet, Saturn, on there. And I'm just going to turn up the air conditioner because these studio lights are really bright and warm. And I forget that once I turn it on, it gets hot. Okay. So let's talk about Star Wars. I've been a fan all my life. And like I said, the joke I made at the beginning of it is that, it doesn't feel the same because it went woke. I'm mostly joking about that. Yes, seeing the modern iteration of Star Wars that feels like it's got a lot of social engineering in it is a little annoying and feels inauthentic. But I think that the problem with it started way before. And yes, I'm an enormous geek, and the fact that I'm even spending time talking about it now just points out to that, but I'm proud to be a geek. I will say, and just real quick to let you know, I'm trying to do this every week. I've been out for 2 weeks. It's mostly because of laziness, but it's also because I've been struggling with, I think it's allergies. My tongue has swollen. Makes it hard for me to talk. I finally got health insurance. It was the first time I had health insurance since like 2017. Finally got it. And my dad has kind of bullied me, as he should, to go, and so is my girlfriend, to go to the freaking doctor. And I finally went to the doctor. It only cost me $5 out of my pocket. I got medicine, all sorts of stuff. We're on the path of recovery. Hopefully this is going to fix it. If not, I'm going to go to a throat, ears, and eyes and knees doctor or something like that if this doesn't do it. But my tongue has been swollen for like 2 months. It's raw because I'm chewing on it when I talk and eat. My lymph nodes are and I'm worried because my grandfather died of throat cancer. And now he was a smoker, so maybe that's what it was. But we're both big drinkers, bean blossoms. Anyway, all right, let's talk about this. So let me take you back my own experience, okay? So Star Wars came out in 1977, and I was 6 years old. And I remember the first time I saw it in the theater when I was 6 in 1977. We had a babysitter, and I don't know if my parents gave her the money or not, but I think probably I can't remember who she was, but me and my sister, who would have been 10, we had a babysitter, and she brought out a newspaper. It was during the day, and she says, "Hey, you kids, you want to go see a movie?" And we're like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Let's go see this." And in the newspaper, in black and white, was that poster of Luke Skywalker holding up the saber, the lightsaber, and Princess Leia clinging to his leg. This is a very classic. I can't remember the name of the artist, but the guy who did the Conan paintings, very fantasy painting of the warrior with his sword and the woman clinging to his thigh, and it had Darth Vader's helmet, and I remember looking at that, and I had never seen anything like that. I mean, I had seen Star Trek, because Star Trek came out like in the late 60s, and so when I was a kid, here we go, Brian Riley, Star Wars. You know what? Brian Riley says, oh, hang on, I just lost it. Where'd it go? Star Wars fans don't make Star Wars movies. You're absolutely right, Brian. Because you know who makes Star Wars movies? Are people who have done everything possible to be part of Hollywood. And it's not that they love the movies or the IPs. They just love being Hollywood people. And so the big corporations buy the IPs, whether it's superheroes or Star Wars, whatever, and then hand it off to these nepotism kids that just want to be part of Hollywood and pretend like they like it, but they don't. And so they're just creating what they think it is, or what they think it should be. But I think the problem started earlier with Star Wars. So anyway, long story short, we went and saw it, and I saw Space 1999. I had a Space 1999 lunchbox when I was in the first grade. I had seen Star Trek. Space Odyssey had 2001 had been out, but I hadn't seen it. I didn't see it until I was in college. It's a great movie. But I had never seen anything quite like Star Wars. And I loved it. I know that I went to see it at least twice in the theater. I remember that first time with the babysitter. I also remember my parents went to see One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is also one of the great movies that came out that year. And Michonne and I, my sister, went to see Star Wars again. And I remember it was at the theater at the Renaissance, not the Renaissance Center. It was at Fairlane Mall in Dearborn, Michigan. And I remember like the red carpet and like going down this dark hall, and they had these lit light boxes that had they had like bulbs in it, and they had like posters. And to me at that time, the mid to late 70s felt futuristic to me. I felt like it was the beginning of the end of the 70s and the beginning of the 80s. Everything felt very futuristic, and like we were beginning to step into the future. So the 60s and the early 70s were over. And so anyway, I have never seen anything like it. I was a fan immediately. I will say though, and when I played with my friends, the two friends I had in different circles were blonde head kids. So they were always Luke Skywalker. I was always Han Solo. I didn't have a lot of toys. I had stuffed animals, but I mostly, when I played as a child, lived in a pretend world, and I played out fantasies, usually ones that had swords in them. I will say that I think I liked the 1980s version of Flash Gordon. I love that. It's still one of my favorite. I still like that movie more than Star Wars, to tell you the truth. I love Buck Rogers, the show, and Battlestar Galactica. So I was in. I loved all that stuff. A lot of people say that Empire Strikes Back was the best Star Wars movie. I don't agree. I still like the first one. Empire Strikes Back was great because like Star Wars had come out. I'd seen it. This is before we had VCRs or cable. So the only way you could see Star Wars is you had to go to the theater to see it. And back at that time, we used to brag, like, how many times have you gone to see Star Wars? Well, I've seen it this time. when Grease came out, and I think in what year did Grease come out? Like 76, or maybe after that. I can't remember, but I remember I saw that 6 times in the theater. We had great movies in the 70s. I think the 70s was a pinnacle of Western culture, but I'm getting away from myself. Empire Strikes Back was good, and I enjoyed it, and I still like it, but it felt different. It wasn't the same. It was like if you liked Star Wars and you wanted more, here's more. And of course, we got to, it wasn't spoiled for me. I sat in the theater watching as Luke, he's got his hand chopped off. He's hanging on for dear life. So he doesn't fall off into whatever that thing is. And Darth Vader is like, Obi-Wan never told you about your father. And he's like, he told me enough. He told me you killed him. No, Luke, I am your father. I never saw him coming. Of course, at that time, let's see, I would have been 9 in 1980 when it came out. Yeah, 9. And then by the time we got to the Jedi, Return of the Jedi, so that was like what, 83, 84. So that by that time, now I'm like 12, 13 years old, puberty's hitting, and I'm telling you right now, Carrie Fisher in the Leia Slave bikini was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me in puberty. That movie was okay, but I remember like even the Ewoks, and I'm not against it, but even then I knew like, okay, now this is becoming more corporate and it's becoming more, what do you call it? It's, I know what they're doing. They want to sell stuffed animals. They want to sell merchandise. And then Star Wars went into a long phase of like comic books and novels, none of which I read or paid attention to. I almost kind of forgot about it and got more into like Buck Rogers and things like that. Now, I've always loved space, so space and swords. I always tell Laura it's got to have space or swords or spaceships in it, or I'm not interested. Of course, I watch more than that, but those are the things I like the most. Then in the 90s, they came back and they did the prequels, and I will say that my love for Star Wars was reborn. I went and saw all those in the theater. And the one thing that I really enjoyed at that time was now I was a novel reader. And so back then in the 90s, when they did the prequels, they would put the novel out first. And so you could read the novel first. And I like doing that. I don't like reading a novel after I've watched the movie. I've done it a few occasions, like Papillon, which is a great novel that I saw the famous one with Steve McQueen and Dustin Hoffman. It's a great movie. The novel's even better. I know they remade that movie. I refused to watch it because that one was perfect. The guy who actually went through all that and wrote the book, it's a true story, was on the set, and they shot it at the actual prison. But I digress. So I read The Phantom Menace, and I read the Attack of the Clones, and I read the Revenge of the Sith, and I think of those three, Revenge of the Sith is probably, I think everybody agrees. But I do remember I liked it, but I was a little disappointed. I didn't, I feel bad for Jake Lloyd who played Anakin. I felt the acting was really bad, the directing was really bad, the dialogue was really bad. I didn't like the CG. The original Star Wars was practical effects, so it did feel really different, and it also felt very new, even though it's taking place. It's before the original trilogy happens. The original trilogy felt lived in an old world, where this was like a little newer and more modern. Brian says, the biggest problem with the prequels is Lucas was surrounded by yes men. Yes. And there was no iron shaping iron to make those movies better. I like that. Yeah, I agree with you. And, I do think that ultimately the IP belongs to Lucas. So I respect his decisions more than anybody else's, but I don't think that, I mean, like the midichlorians, I don't think anybody likes. And I've heard what he thought he wanted to do with the prequels or the sequels. And I don't know if those would have been any better than what they did was try to just remake Star Wars, but with new characters, a female lead. The thing that somehow by putting a girl in the lead of all Star Wars is going to make young girls put their Barbies down and pick up lightsabers. It ain't ever going to happen, man. All you're going to do is chase away the boys who are the ones that made it popular, who bought all the toys. If you want to make stuff for girls, make stuff for girls. Don't take boy stuff and make it for girls, because then nobody likes it. And I think that's what happened with Star Wars. And they still haven't learned their lesson. Maybe with the failure of the Acolyte, maybe. What's funny, and on a side note, I have not seen the Acolyte. I stopped watching Star Wars after The Last Jedi. I was like, after The Last Jedi, I'm like, okay. And I'm not like boycotting or anything. I'm just not interested. Never went and saw The Rise of Skywalker. I was done. I don't pay for streaming services, so I got to see a couple episodes of The Mandalorian. It looked pretty good. I've heard they ruined it by the third, because once again, it's we gotta get the girls to start playing Star Wars. They're never gonna do it. You might as well, if you want girls, make stuff for girls. That's all you gotta do. Star Wars is what little boys, Laura. I think it was Ethan Van Sciver said this. Like, if you go to your wife, any man out there, go. I mean, and yes, there are some women who love Star Wars, but they love Star Wars the way it was. You ask go to your wife, your girlfriend, whatever, and say, "Hey, honey, you want to watch Star Wars?" Not really. Well, what if it's the lead character is a woman? Yeah, I'm still not really that interested. Okay, what if we make her a lesbian? Star Wars for nerds, man. And I'm a nerd. I love it. I'm a boy. I'm a 12-year-old boy. Star Wars is for 12-year-old boys. Yes, there are girls who love it and bless them for loving it, and they belong there too. But I believe that instead of trying to please everybody, find your audience, try to please them, and you'll get a lot of others. I, for example, write novels that the 12-year-old boy in me. In fact, if you looked at my thumbnail for this, that's me at 12 years old, that with my two swords. My dad sent that to me to try to embarrass me. It doesn't embarrass me. I'm proud of it. I'm still that kid. I'm still a 12-year-old little boy who's immature and ridiculous and likes things like Star Wars. All right, so let's get back to this. Yes, modern day woke Star Wars is annoying. And yes, I have nothing against female leads or female action heroes, but it's always a 119-pound woman flipping around the air, beating up 300-pound muscle-bound men who've been training all their life. It gets a little old after a while. But that's the problem was before that. And I will say that even from the original Star Wars, I refuse to call a New Hope, because it wasn't a New Hope. It was Star Wars. It wasn't Episode 4. It was Star Wars. And then it was successful, so they did a sequel. And by the way, even then, and this is why I think it lost its feel from Star Wars to Empire Strikes Back, is that Star Wars was a low-budget film, and they weren't certain that there would be a second film. And the second film, the original idea was Splinter in a Mind's Eye. That was written, and they were going to do that film if Star Wars was a failure. And I think they had a deal. I could be wrong here, but I think I heard that there was a deal for a sequel depending on how well the film performed. And so Splinter in a Mind's Eye, and I haven't read it, it was designed to be a lower budget film than the original Star Wars that could be easily done. And in it, Luke and Leia have a relationship, have sex with each other, because them being brother and sister hadn't been thought out. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with Star Wars, is a lot of it was made up as they went. And so that's why you can almost not fault the ones making it today, because it's always been kind of by the seat of the pants. And the story changed even in the original trilogy. You can find, and I'm not an expert about this, but you can find contradictions from the first Star Wars movie to through Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, because the story changed. Luke and Leia weren't always brother and sister. That decision got made later on. I don't know when Darth Vader was going to be Luke's dad. I kind of feel like that was always there, but I could be wrong. So here's my theory. I was thinking about this the other day because I really do love the original Star Wars movie more than any of the other ones. And maybe it's because I was 6 years old and much more impressionable, and I'd never seen anything like it. But it does feel different than like even The Empire Strikes Back, which I still like. And it occurred to me what it was. I write 19th century romantic, and I don't mean romantic, oh, I love you, baby. I mean like romanticism, like heroic, kind of honor culture, kind of an idealized sense of that they call it the romantic period, the kind of romanticism that people in the 19th century had. And I realized that the original Star Wars movie was a story that better fit the 19th century romanticism. And hear me out on this. The 19th century, which is where I do most of my writing, and I plan to get, I'm going to do some early 20th century, and then I'm going to go back and do some. I got more 19th century books, but I might get into another romantic period later on, which I think are like the Renaissance. But that's way on. That's 10 books from now. But if you think about the 19th century, where I'm writing my own books, okay. It is really the end of an era. It's the end of the swashbuckling romantic era. The 19th century starts with muskets and sabers. And, when during the Napoleonic Wars, swords are still a practical weapon, that men are carrying swords into combat and are using them. As the 19th century progresses, swords fall out of practical use, and they are even in World War One. There is the Patton sword. It's a saber. It's got a rubberized grip, and it was still a sword, a practical sword for practical use. But the use of swords were dying out as guns started becoming more and more the prominent weapon, and we started with muzzle-loading muskets, smoothbore muskets in the beginning of the 19th century. And by the end of the 19th century, we were already having automatic machine guns. Brian says, hang on, I'm trying to pull it up, but my screen's jumping. Here we go. Cody, as an author, you can't blame the audience for not liking your new stuff and keep fans. It's disrespectful to the audience. Disney uses these tactics. Absolutely. And one of the things they do, I think, is, I agree with having, women heroes and minorities and things like that. But even before it comes out, they start kind of using that as a shield, so that if you don't like it, you're sexist or you're racist or it's because you don't like that, as opposed to bad writing and bad characterization. No one had any problems with. If you watch the original Star Wars, Leia they kind of flipped the script because it's the old trope, like I said, a very 19th century romantic trope of saving the princess. But the princess is immediately bossing him around. She takes the laser blaster. She's like, "Give me that thing, you fool!" And the first thing she says to Luke when she opens up the door, she says, "Aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper?" I mean, Han can't even believe it. She's bossing him around because she's not just a simple damsel. That was already in there. We had Lando Calrissian. We had all that stuff was already there. They're not breaking any ground. And just because we don't like the new stuff doesn't mean we're against any of that stuff. Not at all. But the 19th century was a transition into the modern era, from the romantic swashbuckling era into the modern era, and as things get more, wars become less of a affair between gentlemen and more of an economic, industrial total war thing that we start seeing in World War I and World War II. The pure war is always bad, but the ugliness of it got more and more as we become, and we're seeing this transition. Now think about this, okay? Because this is layered, because it's not just that the story is a 19th century style story, but it also fits what was going on in the 70s as far as movies and entertainment. Okay. So first of all, I like to think of Luke Skywalker is the same character of D'Artagnan in the Three Musketeers. Yes, the Three Musketeers take place in the 1600s. Which is also kind of what I think of the swashbuckling era to me is like the fall of Constantinople in like the mid 1400s to the end of World War II. Okay, as it's dying and dying and dying, into the modern age where there is no honor, there is only war and ugliness. D'Artagnan, but the Three Musketeers was written in the 19th century, in I believe in the 1840s, and Alexander Dumas, who is the author that I have modeled myself after. I think he was writing it or finishing it in 1846. He's in my novel Mexico, My Love, and he's finishing that and starting the Count of Monte Cristo. But D'Artagnan, okay, think about this. D'Artagnan is a young Frenchman. He's a teenager living out in the countryside of France, in the rural area, bored with his life. All he knows is that his father was a musketeer, which is a highly prestigious warriors. The Musketeers, at least in that, I don't know much about that actual history, but according to Alexander Dumas' book, the Musketeers are the king's own personal regiment. They protect the king, and they're also using the new, technology of the muskets. But they're primarily swordsmen first. So D'Artagnan leaves his boring farmer's life to go to Paris to become a musketeer like his father was, and goes on this grand adventure where he meets the other, the Three Musketeers, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. That's Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker is a farm boy who knows that his father was some kind of Jedi legend. And Luke Skywalker is bored with the farm life. He wants to go to pilot school so he can fight with the rest of the rebels against the Empire. But his uncle's like, "No, you got to stay here for another season to help out on the farm." And so that character is very much the same thing. Farm boy, his dad's a legend, and Luke wants to become that legend too, just like D'Artagnan. Han Solo, who's also in my thumbnail, is the transition that's happening in the 19th century. The swordsmen turn into the gunslingers. So Han Solo is a gunslinger. That's Wyatt Earp, the real picture of Wyatt Earp. Brian says Rey would have been a better character if she faced challenges and failed early on in The Force Awakens. I agree. And I think that was the first part where I was beginning to get suspicious. I mean, already watching it, I'm like, okay, this is really like the original Star Wars retold. I mean, everything's in it. From the desert planet throwaway kid on a desert planet, learns of their greatness, goes on a grand adventure, meets Han Solo, gets in the Millennium Falcon, and and they blow up a Death Star like thing. But that fight between her and Kylo Ren made no sense to me at all. Like, I understood that she was kind of tough. She grew up on a tough planet. She had to learn how to fight a little bit. I kind of got that, but the fact that she was beating Kylo Ren. Now later, I believe, I haven't watched the last one because I don't care anymore. But I guess in the Rise of Skywalker, they explained that, I think retroactively, because they heard everybody complain, was that somehow there was like this dyad in which all the training that Kylo Ren did, she was getting that too, because they're somehow connected. It's bullshit. I mean, it's just bullshit. They just wanted to erase Luke Skywalker and replace her with Rey. Was it like a feminist fever dream fantasy? Sure. But I think it was also a business thing, because I think that the deal that they made with George Lucas is that he still gets a cut of the royalties from the original characters. But if they create characters to replace the original characters, he doesn't. So if you create Rey to replace Luke Skywalker as the primary character and do things with her, now you don't have to pay George Lucas any royalties. That's why they kill off Han Solo. That's why they killed off Luke. They didn't mean to kill off Carrie Fisher's character. That just kind of happened on its own, but that's the end result. So the other part of it is, like I said, Luke is kind of like the D'Artagnan, the swordsman of a dying era, that the swordsmen have died off. It's an age gone by. And even in my own writing about the 19th century, there's kind of a nostalgia of the past where men carried swords and had honor. And it's being replaced with men carrying guns and not having honor. And Han Solo kind of represents that new man, that new warrior, the gunslinger, not the swashbuckling hero, but the gunslinger. And there's a nostalgia for that glorious past in the 19th century, and you can see it. It's when Ivanhoe was written, which is where a lot of the Robin Hood legend comes from. And so there's already this this nostalgia for an age gone by. Now let's get to 1977, where Star Wars comes out, and think about where we were in 1977 as a culture in entertainment. A lot of people talk about superhero fatigue, and I think it is happening, especially for normies, because the normies are tired of superhero movies, and the people who actually like the superheroes are tired of it not being represented the way it being, once again, used as a platform for social engineering. Well, the Western was like that too, up until from like the end of World War II up until like the mid 70s, the Westerns were king. They were like the superhero movies of that time. And so when Star Wars came out, we were used to seeing Westerns. Westerns were kind of fading out, but they were something that was very much in the social conscious. And we liked them, I remember even as a kid, I was a big fan of the Apple Dumpling Game, which was, by the way, a Disney, back when Disney was great. And I even heard Lucas say that this is like a Western, a space Western, and very much is. Han Solo is very much a gunslinger. He's very much a cowboy in it. And so also the other popular genre in film up to that point was the big sword and sandal colossals, right? Like the big Roman films, like the Ten Commandments and Cleopatra and all those big Roman things. And if you remember in that, the Romans always had British accents, because back then the British accent was code for imperialism, right? And whether they were good or bad, the Romans were British because we saw the British as being the empire, the establishment, and then the rebels were always, spoke with American English. That got kind of flipped over. Now everybody's got a British accent because it's cool. I mean, you even have American actors using fake British accents to be in Star Wars. But the Empire had a little bit of that Roman Empire feel because all the Empire, the Imperials, all had British accents in Star Wars, in the original Star Wars. And I feel like that, once again, came out of when we saw that in 1977. It was familiar to us because, once again, it's an era gone by. And old Hollywood was the big sword and sandal thing. And there was a nostalgia for it as it was dying out. And we were seeing it reiterated in space. And also, the Empire in Star Wars was also fashioned after the bad guys of World War II, who, by the way, had the most fabulous uniforms. I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but the bad guys of World War II, the German soldiers of World War II, those uniforms were designed by Hugo Boss. That's why they look fabulous. And I'll say this, the Germans, before they were the absolute villains, had been winning the military fashion contest since the Prussians of the mid-19th century. Because if you look at, that's one of the things I really love about writing about them. I've written a novel about the Austro-Prussian War. I'm writing one about the Franco-Prussian War now. And I'm not saying they were innocents, but they weren't the guys in World War II. There were Jewish commanders and officers and in the military. And I'm not saying anti-Semitism didn't exist back then, but it wasn't what happened in the mid-19th or the 20th century. All right, I'm going too far on a tangent. But what I'm saying is that when you watch the original Star Wars, there is already built in it the very first time you watch it in 1977. Not watching it today. Watching it in 1977, even then, there was a feeling of nostalgia in it, of an era gone by, because it had elements of the old Westerns and the old sword and sandal movies that we had seen in the 50s and the 60s. And that kind of hero's journey, that Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. And not only that, but the world, everything that we had seen in space was immaculate. Space was immaculate. Like when you watch Star Trek, immaculate sets, immaculate uniforms, not a smudge mark, no dust anywhere. If you watch like Space 1999, you can find those episodes. Everything just looks sterile and perfectly clean. Space is immaculate. The future is immaculate. Star Wars didn't look like that at all. Star Wars was dirty. The droids were dented and dusty and dirty. The equipment, the Millennium Falcon didn't work well. He hit the thing to get it started. It was very lived in. And once again, just like in the 19th century, like by the time you get to the mid to the late 19th century, there's a nostalgia for that era gone by of honor and men who carried swords. And it's in Star Wars as well, where, Ben Kenobi says to Luke, he says, a more elegant weapon of a more civilized age. Because even in Star Wars, the original Star Wars, the lightsaber is an archaic weapon. It's thought of that way. I mean, even Han Solo is like, yeah, give me a blaster any day. That's what our grandfathers fought with. And Luke is looking backwards to the heroes of the past to become a hero in his own time. I think that by the time they got to the second movie, they had moved away from that nostalgic feel, and they were starting to catch up with all their competitors, so making it more like Battlestar Galactica Buck Rogers and making things more futuristic and clean and new and real and futuristic. And then it kept going that way, so that once you get to the prequels, first of all, there's a huge use of CG, and it loses that feel of the practical effects. And by the way, they need to go back through the original movies and clean out all the CG and let it be what it was, because it doesn't look right to put CG in a movie that was made in the late 70s. And then as we go on, I really feel like they cheapened the Force and they cheapened the lightsabers and the Jedi, because I remember like in 1980, before, or maybe even the late 70s, when cable first started, and on HBO they had a documentary about the making of Star Wars, the original Star Wars. And I think this is before the Empire came out, and they had real kendo teachers out there. And kendo, Japanese sword fighting, is not doing flips and twirling swords around. It's the opposite of that. Japanese martial arts, that's Chinese and Korean, all that flipping and jumping around and unnecessarily twirling weapons that has absolutely no practical use at all, except maybe intimidating your opponent. Japanese is the simplicity, the pure cut simplicity. And the early sword fights are kendo and in the true art form. And not only that, but the concept of, and I remember watching the documentaries, they had real kendo teachers teaching, I can't remember the name of the actor who played Obi-Wan, and the guy who's the physical actor for Darth Vader, were actually learning kendo and not flipping around and twirling stuff. But also that they talked about how the Force was actually the Zen of Zen Buddhism. It wasn't a superpower, and it wasn't an overt power that could be. I mean, now they use the Force as just a plot contrivance. The Force can be whatever the writer wants it to be. I mean, now they use it for, I don't know, face healing. It's ridiculous how much they've diluted it by several things. They've ruined the mystique and the mystery of the Force and the Jedi by making everybody's a Jedi. Everybody's got a light sword. Everybody's got the Force. It no longer is special. It's no longer a mystery. It's just like, well, yeah, it's just a plot contrivance now. And it's also an equalizer. So that's why you can have a character like Rey, who's like, probably 119 pounds after a meal, being able to best people who are twice her size, who've been training longer, because she's got the Force. So she's got magical powers that she can, Force push them and flip through the air and twirl around, because the Force is doing that, not any kind of training that she had to go through or anything like that. So it cheapened it. So I guess to round this up, my feeling is this, is that what made the original Star Wars film feel the way it did was that it had in it an already built nostalgia of an era gone by. And so what we're seeing in the original film is after the end of an era, of a nostalgia looking back in a more civilized time and a more elegant weapon, which is a sword. And that's kind of what it was like even in the American Civil War, they were beginning to realize that the sabers were not really that practical. Saber charges were getting less and less effective. We still see them in, the German wars of unification, like in the Austro-Prussian War and the Franco-Prussian War, but it's becoming more and more impractical as firearms are becoming more accurate. We're getting rifled, breech-loading rifles that are much more accurate and faster, that nullifies. Cavalry goes from being a weapon to use to break up infantry formations and to chase down enemy troops when they're in retreat. Now cavalry becomes more of mounted infantry, in which we use horses, like what they use strikers today and Bradleys, of getting your soldiers to the battlefield, and then they dismount and fight. So that's really it. I say that the original Star Wars movie is really like, it's like you could do the same story and put it in the 19th century, where a kid growing up in the American West, his father once carried a sword, and was one of the last of a dying breed of great swordsmen, but now he's living in a world that is dominated by the six-shooter, the blaster, and has to go on this adventure and learn the ways of the sword and his father's way of a more gallant swashbuckling. And I also feel like that fit in 1977 because we were also kind of making a transition from like the Westerns and the Roman colossals to the, there was a new golden age of science fiction happening in the mid to late 70s through like the the mid 80s, and then it went away, came back in the 90s, went away, and now it's back again. All right, enough of that rant. And if you like current Star Wars, good for you. I hope you enjoy it. I haven't seen The Acolyte. The thing about The Acolyte is that when I hear the concept of it, it sounds interesting. It sounds like it would have been a very interesting show. I like the idea behind it. I understand the execution was bad. I've heard a lot of people talk about it, and it sounds like there were a lot of plot holes and contrivances that it wasn't really well written. Somebody once said that it felt like a first draft, like they wrote it, but they didn't rework it. They didn't think things through, and it probably could have been better. It'd be interesting if to have someone fix it, say, okay, let's do it. Let's do this concept, this idea, the way you want to do it, but let's fix all these contrivances and do some better writing, and to see if we can get, it'll never be done because it's over. The other thing is too, now I have a friend of mine, Jack, who gets really mad when I say this, but if I would have been tasked with writing the sequels, I don't know if George, I've heard a little bit about George Lucas's idea that they shoved aside. I think what they did is they just tried to remake Star Wars, but with different characters so they could sell that merchandise, and it didn't work. What I would have done is someone, well, I like this it wasn't originally my idea, but when we were first getting clues about what The Force Awakens was going to be about, and we were first beginning to see pictures, and we were introduced to the character Kylo Ren, and he was wearing a helmet. There were some people out there putting out the idea that Kylo Ren was Luke Skywalker, and that Luke Skywalker, in that battle with his father in Return of the Jedi, there's a moment where the Emperor is saying, Luke, use your anger, strike your father down, and take his place, turn to the dark side. And at some point, when Luke's father threatens Leia, his sister, Luke loses it, lets his anger take over, and does defeat his father using his anger, chops off his hand. And some people say right there is where Luke crossed over. But of course, he relents because he throws his saber to a side. When he sees his father's hands chopped off and he realizes he's just like him, he's like, yeah, I won't. You failed. I'll never turn to the dark side. I'm a Jedi like my father. And it's a great moment. I really do love it. And the redemption of Vader. But I like the idea of the sins of the father are revisited upon the son. And that maybe, and I also like the idea that heroes can be corrupted. And a lot of times people start, and this happens all through history. I won't bore you with a bunch of examples, but I will give you one. Napoleon, right? Napoleon the First. Napoleon comes in a man of the people. He's a super liberal. He he is a national hero at the Battle of Toulon. But eventually, as Napoleon rises in power, he begins to start shifting to the other side. And he starts off, he becomes a hero, ends up a tyrant. And whereas like the original trilogy of Star Wars is kind of a little bit like the Empire or the bad guys from Germany in World War II, what if you made the sequels more like the rise and fall of Napoleon, in which that, so hear me out on this. So in the first movie, in episode 7, what I would do is I would have, it's after the fall of the Empire, after they blow up and the Republic is starting, that Luke becomes very popular because he's a hero of the rebellion, and he is made chancellor or president of the New Republic. But over the course of the movie, there's some kind of other threat. But over the course of it, kind of like Napoleon III, who starts off as president and then declares himself emperor, that somehow in that time where Luke is the hero, by the end of the first movie, he falls over and becomes, and the prophecy is fulfilled that he does become the new emperor. He does become the new bad guy. I'm not sure what I would do in the middle, but then the final movie, the third movie of that, I would still, have Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver, but I think the original concept was that they were supposed to be twins of Leia and Han, to have them redeem Luke at the end of the third movie and finish the whole thing. So I like the idea of kind of like the great tragedy that Luke will also fall. And that's why we saw in The Empire Strikes Back, where he goes in the cave and strikes, the image of his father's down, and the helmet comes off and it's his own face. It's foreshadowing that battle he has with his father, where he finally uses his anger to defeat his father. It's his first step into the dark side. Let him also fall. Let it be a tragedy. Take the whole first movie to make it happen. So it's not until the end of the movie, like, it's a surprise. Oh my God, Luke has turned into a bad guy. And then by the third movie, bring him back. That's what I would have done. All right. Let's move on. We're getting closer to the hour, so I'll wrap some of this stuff up. What's going on with me? Well, first of all, I want to tell you that let's do this. Share screen. We're running a deal right now in the U.S. Mexico, my love. Hang on a second. Okay. Is this no. All right. Okay, boom. Add the stage. All right, there we go. Mexico, my love, is only 99 cents on Kindle in the U.S. I think there's just go to Amazon and search on it, or I think if you follow the link I put down below. First of all, please join my my email list, and I'll tell you why. When I run specials like this, I email my list to let people know. So right now, Mexico, my love, it is the prequel to my trilogy. It's the story of Carl's parents. And by the way, you'll see, I mean, they're very subtle, but you'll see some references to Star Wars in it, even the secret secret father. Here's another one from Ryan. He says, oh no, I already read that. Okay. So anyway, that's only 99 cents in the US through Tuesday. Then it's going to be 99 pence in the UK starting on Wednesday for a week. So so that's a great place to enter if you want to get into my series. Book 1 is Rampage on the River. And the first 3 books are Civil War. It's Carl's story. This is book 4, but it's actually a prequel. And it basically tells the story about how Carl and his mom eventually end up in Detroit. She ends up, it's not a spoiler at all. It's a tragic love story. So you'll know why Claudette ends up a single mother in Detroit and Carl grows up without a father. Is how we find him before he goes on his Civil War adventure. Next three books are Civil War, and then after chronologically, book 5 is The Prussian Prince, which is out right now. And that one's I think $4.99. Eventually, we will put a deal on that once the pre-orders for the French Fiasco start. I don't know when that's going to be. It's when I finish the French Fiasco or the rough draft. I'll start the pre-orders for it. I pretty much have the cover worked out. We have to make some adjustments to make it better, but I know what the cover is going to look like. I'll tell you where I am right now. I've been struggling I always struggle at the end of the month and then get back into it at the beginning. My month of writing starts on the 4th of every month because I started on March the 4th writing this novel. So I always count how my progress at the end of each month. The month starts on the 4th. So where am I right now with the French Fiasco? I am a little bit over. Let me see if I can give you an exact word count or an approximate. I know that I'm over. Let's see here. Look at my notes here. Yeah, I'm just over 70,000 words on the French Fiasco. So it is now longer than Rampage on the River and the Perils of Perryville. Rampage on the River was 56,000 words. Perils of Perryville was 69,000. And then I not overstepped, but Blood for Blood was 119,000 words. Mexico, My Love was 124,000 words. I decided that I wanted to get back around 80,000 words. That somewhere between 80 and 90,000 was, I thought, a good place, a good length for a novel. I think that for several reasons. I think readers actually like a book that's between 300 to 400 pages, which is about 80,000 words. When it's longer than that, I mean, if it's a good book, that's great. But I think that sometimes longer books are kind of daunting for readers, and they want something that they can finish and move on to something else. So I think it's better to write around 80,000 word books. It's also better from a business point of view on my end because, I can get the books out faster and a tighter story. So I have, 2 books that are around 120,000 words. I want to get back down to 80. This one's at 70,000 right now, and I'm closing part 3 of it right now, which ends with the Battle of Sedan. So in the narrative, we are doing the Battle of Sedan right now. It has started in the narrative. And this book starts just before the war, the Franco-Prussian War. There's still a part 4 that I want to write. So I think I'll definitely overshoot the 80,000 words. I hope to keep it at least under 100,000. So where I sit right now, I think I'll probably finish I'm at 70,000 words, a little more than that. I'll probably finish part 4 and the Battle of Sedan within the next 3,000 to 6,000 words. So it'll be probably about 76,000 words, and then we'll do part 4, which is really the part of the book that I have been planning since I wrote Rampage on the River. So just so you know, this series has evolved as I've been writing it, but there are certain things that I always was going to do. That was the plan from very early on. And part 4 of this is a big part of that I'm finally going to get to. So how long is part 4 going to be? Maybe if I can keep it to about 10,000 words, no more than 20,000 words. So maybe it'll be around 96,000 words. That's just an estimation right now. Like I said, I'd like to keep it between 80 and 90,000 words. Hopefully that will be out early next year. The plan is once the rough draft is done, there's not a lot of major surgery because I do a lot of editing as I go, especially story. So there's not any major surgery. It's more like copy editing and just fixing a few things here and there, and mostly just fixing typos and things like that, and small inconsistencies in the novel. We'll do at least 60 days of pre-orders, and the reason why is I found out that if you follow me on Amazon, so you can follow authors, and I have no control. I know that I have 165 followers, but I don't know their names. I don't have their email addresses, and Amazon is supposed to update them when I have something new. They did not update them when I had a pre-order last time, and I found out that you have to have at least 60 days of pre-orders for them to do that. I also don't think they put out an email when my book came out, and I don't know why, because I get them for everybody else. I get them, when Lloyd's new books comes out. I get everybody I follow when they have a new book. I get an email. An email never came out for the Prussian Prince, and I wonder if it's because of AI, because it's Prussians. And some of the German military iconography that goes all the way back to the Napoleonic era was co-opted and still part of German militarism during World War II. And so I wonder if because of that, it got flagged because it looks like the bad guys of World War II. And because of that, Amazon didn't put out the email. And if you got an email saying that the Prussian Prince came out, please let me know. So anyway, I'm going to do at least 60 days of pre-orders for the new book, the French Fiasco. And during that time, I will do my editing, and then I'll send it off to my editors, which is Laura and my mother, and we'll get it nice and clean, and then we'll put it out there. And then once that is published, I am going to write a novella that is going to be, I believe, exclusive for my email list. So if you want to read this book or this novella, please join my list. It's free. The link is below. I will not spam you. The only thing I'm going to do is I'll give you updates, mostly about sales on the ebooks, and also about new releases, because once again, I can't trust Amazon to put out an email. So I'll put out an email myself to the list to let you know that when the French Fiasco is going to come out. But one of the things they talk about in marketing is to build your list by offering a free novella to exclusive to people who sign up for your list. So I've decided that if you've read Rampage on the River, you know that it starts with it's the night after a ball in which the Southern kids going to college up in Detroit are saying goodbye to their friends and getting on the train the next day to go down south to go fight for their states. And the book starts with friends saying goodbye at the train station. But there was also some drama because Carl kissed a girl, Anna, whose brother is now coming for him, wanting satisfaction, and there's a duel. And you also know that there's a character, Chester Newman, who's a sheriff's deputy, who ends up getting involved in that, and part of that is the catalyst for why Carl gets involved in the Civil War. I won't go any further than that. So when I was told about this technique of offering a novella or a short story that's exclusive to your list, to do something that isn't necessary for people to read, but something that is connected to the series that people would like. And it also has to be I write action adventure, so it's got to be that too. So I came up with a great idea, because it took me a long time. I'm like, what am I going to do? And I sat on it for a few months, thinking it through, and then it struck me. I'm going to do a novella that right now the working title is the Underground Railroad Ball. And it's the story of Chester E. Newman, who's a sheriff's deputy. And a lot of people, you may not know this, but Detroit was one of the terminus, was a terminus for a termini for the Underground Railroad. And the Underground Railroad was Laura was like, there was an actual railroad underground? No. It's just a metaphor. It was a a chain of people who were helping enslaved people escape slavery in the South to get to freedom in Canada. And Detroit was one of the destinations. And we even have a statue on the river of an enslaved family looking across to Canada on the other side to freedom. And so, and during the Fugitive Slave Act, basically compelled law enforcement in the North to help slave catchers from the South recover their property. And so, so I'm going to put together an adventure that Chester E. Newman has the night of the ball, in which Carl first kisses Anna and becomes the enemy of her brother Klaus. And that's happening in the background of Chester's adventure with the slave catchers having to live up to his lawful duty as a law enforcer and his own convictions, the Fugitive Slave Act and the Underground Rebel and all that kind of stuff. So what I would like to do is write a novella. The shortest it would be a short story of 3,000 words. I'll probably be bigger than that. I don't want it to be any longer than 40,000 words. And it might be a few chapters, but like a 100-page book to 200-page book. It will be exclusive. Well, I'll tell you this: it'll be an e-version of it will be free to my my list. I think it's going to be exclusive to them too. I know there are some people who say they want a paper version of it. We might offer that but I will see. It might have to be an exclusive ebook for only those who sign up for the. We'll see what happens. It's one of those things where Brian Cohen, who's a guru in this, says you got to do it, and you say, well, I don't have time. Just make the time. Just stop. So when I finished the French Fiasco, my series that's going to be a resting point for the series. So, like, for example, I wrote the first 3 books, the trilogy that go in chronological order, and at the end of Blood for Blood at Nashville is a stopping point, a resting point where that story kind of completed itself. The whole Civil War saga was over. And then that gave me some room to write Mexico, My Love, which is a prequel, so that I got off the main track and wrote a prequel. And then after Mexico, My Love came out, then I got back on the chronological track because Mexico, My Love actually chronologically takes place before book 1. The Prussian Prince picks up. There's a flashback to 1848, but then after that, it picks up right where we left Carl at the end of Blood for Blood at Nashville, lying in the forest near Nashville in 1864, in December of 1864, and takes him on to a whole new adventure that brings him to Europe and then the Austro-Prussian War. And then the French Fiasco is the direct sequel to that, to the Prussian Prince, of what happens after the Austro-Prussian War, which is the Franco-Prussian War, in which Carl has a big grand adventure and is going to eventually not just kind of conclude that 2-book series, but also kind of rope in all 5 previous books. There's going to be something very satisfying that encapsulates all of it at the end of that. Once again, that'll be a nice resting point. So I'll have time to write my novella. And then after my novella, I'm going to write, and I don't know how I'm going to present this, but I'm going to write a book. It is part of the Long Century series, but it's not in the main sequence of books. It is in the main sequence is books 1 through 3. Book 4 is a prequel, and then book 5 and 6 are main sequence. I'm going to write Black James, and if you haven't read, if you've read Mexico, My Love, you know who he is. If you've read the trilogy, you've heard him mentioned. but it's basically a pirate. And he's the father of Elijah and Liza. And you meet him in the flesh in Mexico, My Love. I'm going to write a standalone book about him that's going to go back before the War of 1812. It's going to start in Africa with either his father or his grandfather. I haven't really figured it out, but it's going to start with tribal warfare to enslavement to fighting for the British in the War of 1812 to becoming a businessman. This is his father in Jamaica, and then James growing up in Jamaica on his father's shipping business and being betrayed and sold into slavery, and his adventure about how he goes from being betrayed, sold into slavery, to freedom and becoming a pirate, and ending up with where we find him in Mexico, My Love. And then we might do more with him later on. And because it's going to be a standalone book, it might be the beginning of its own series. I don't know. And I might do some things too. Like Mexico, My Love originally was officially on Amazon, slated as a prequel. But when I did that, it wasn't showing up on the series page. So I made it book 4, because you can read the books in the order you want, but I think the best order is to read them in the order I wrote them. So read Rampage, Perils, Blood for Blood, Mexico, Prussian Prince, French Fiasco. But I think Black James, I don't know if I'm going to make that book 7, because I don't want people to think they have to read all the other books before he gets that. It can be a new entry point. And so we'll see. I got a lot of time. But then after Black James, I'm going to get back on board with Carl, I think, unless something happens, like it makes more sense to write something else, or, I get some kind of book deal where they want me to write something or whatever. But other than that, the plan is after Black James, I'm going back to the main sequence, and I'm writing 4 more books, and then I'll be done with Carl. And that will be there'll be a North African desert adventure. There'll be a Western. There'll be a Japanese adventure, and then there'll be I believe, either a World War I adventure or an eve of the World War I adventure. And then we'll be done with that. There are some other books I want to write. There's a kind of either interbellum or up to World War II book that I would like to write that is not part of this. It may be connected, but it won't be part of the story that, the series I'm writing now. There are some a French Revolution and Haitian Revolution books that I want to write. There's American Revolution book that I want to write. And then I might jump into another era altogether. So we'll see. But anyway, that's where we are today. I won't bore you guys anymore. Thanks for tuning in. Please do me a favor. Like this video. It helps the algorithm. Leave me a comment below, especially if you're watching this in replay, and join my my email group. Like I said, I won't spam you. I'll just let you know when there's new things coming out. And also, if you're an author yourself, if you want to see how I'm doing, I have joined a lot of other authors' email list, because I want to see how they're doing their stuff, because I'm constantly a student of the art, right? So join my email list, and if you're a reader and you have an author out there that you like, make sure that you go on to Amazon and Goodreads, give them a 5-star review, and if you really like them, write a review. It doesn't have to be very involved. It can just be like, really loved it, couldn't put it down. Bam, 5 stars, you're done. That helps us a lot. We're always trying to stay above 5 stars average. I think Rampage is right. I'm sorry, stay above 4 stars. At under 4 stars, you stop the algorithm stops showing that book to people. Rampage is right at 4 stars with 97 reviews or 90. Yeah. So I'm trying to keep that above 4 stars. So it helps me out. Or if it's someone else that you really like, I'm doing it. I'm reading a guy right now. Can't remember his name, but he also has a book about the Franco-Prussian War. So I like to read other novels, just to see how, just to get immersed in the history and the era. When I get done with it, it's called Assignment Paris. I can't remember his name, but I'm going to give him a 5-star review. And I'll write a review for him, and I'll do that. I'll probably do a live when I finish that. So, also, I'm going to try to get back on track. I know I skipped a week. A week got away from me. I'm going to try to get back to doing this weekly. I appreciate you tuning in. I love you guys. Have a great week. Keep writing, keep reading, and I'll see you in the next one.